In this video we talk about the Port of Peril, the new game book by Ian Livingstone, a game book, the only so far previously unpublished game book in the new edition of Fighting Fantasy. Fighting Fantasy is a series that has been around since the 80s in one incarnation or the other. It has been very important in the history of gaming, in the history of interactive literature, because it was the series that launched the entire idea of Gamebook, that is, the idea of an interactive story branching narrative that also includes game mechanics in a self-contained package. There were, starting from the late 70s, several solo modules for Tunnels and Trolls, and then later even for Dungeons and Dragons. So you could play an adventure by yourself, and the text was sort of like choose your own adventure thing. Had that sort of structure, but you needed to have familiarity with the game system to be able to appreciate it. The Warlock of Firetop Mountain by Livingstone and Jackson, that came out in 1982, was the first book that you could just pick up and be the hero of the story and play it using game mechanics, rolling dice, keeping inventory, and still have the sort of like narrative immersion. The series closed initially in the 90s, and then it has resurfaced several times. Of course, the original series was like 59 volumes, so like new volumes, and then when Fighting Fantasy has returned in the early 20th century and then in more recent years, every time it has had a different structure, not mainly unpublished text anymore, but rather reprints, reissues of previous books published in the 80s and the 90s with the occasionally new title. Jonathan Green has been one of the most active new authors in the new incarnations of Fighting Fantasy. Ian Livingstone himself has written 3 books in the 21st century, adding to the Fighting Fantasy lore. Eye of the Dragon, Blood of the Zombies, and now the Port of Peril. So in a certain sense, I'm very excited, like, wow, like the maestro is back, the master, the founder. On the other hand, the 21st century books by Ian Livingstone in the Fighting Fantasy family have been less than stellar. So definitely I had mixed feelings about the Port of Peril. And we're all busy these days, so actually I'm gonna give you my conclusions in a nutshell, and then for the next 15-20 minutes or so I'm gonna give you the same information with much more detail. In general, this is not a bad book. It is an okay book. It does not live up to the good old standards of the golden age of Fighting Fantasy. The story is very linear. Therefore, it has the possibility of creating a nice and complex narrative arc. At the same time, however, precisely because it's so linear, it has limited replay value, because once you go through the entire thing, then there are just a couple of deviations that you may have missed and you may discover when rereading it. The difficulty is not too hard. Overall, it's fun, entertaining. I mean, Livingstone and other authors in Fighting Fantasy have written worse. They have also written better, so it's sort of like middle of the way. In terms of difficulty, it is not too difficult. Again, it's not the easiest nor the hardest. It's sort of like just an average, which maybe what we need now, because now the series is being relaunched. The idea is, I guess, not just to recapture the interest of readers that have nostalgia for the old Fighting Fantasy, not just collectors such as myself that will buy anything just because it has Fighting Fantasy. I believe that the hope is to attract new readers, and therefore a new title which is not super complex, not super challenging, is fairly approachable, may just be a good way of doing so. That is, if there is a 10-12-year-old that picks up this book, and that person can spend a couple of fun hours trying to figure out the book, but without experiencing too much frustration. One last thing is like the design. Structurally speaking, the design is fairly weak, by which I mean that there are just mistakes that could have been avoided with some better playtesting and editing. That's in a nutshell. Thank you for watching. Now, if you wanna stay here a little longer, let's talk about the game more in detail, about the game book. Now, Port of Peril, the story, you are a generic fighting fantasy hero, an adventurer. It's unclear who you are, and that is meant so that you can project yourself onto the characters, onto the you that the text talks about. However, you have a little more detail about yourself that you have in many other fighting fantasy books. In particular, what you're told is that you're really, really poor, to the point of being virtually a beggar. It's okay if a fantasy adventure is not particularly wealthy. That explains why that adventure is always out there looking for treasures to loot. But here it's the idea is strangely intense. You're not just in search of adventure and money. You're really literally a homeless beggar. So much so that the first section number 1, opens with you going to the trash, or through like a trash by the street, looking for some leftovers that people have thrown away so you can eat them. That is depressing. That is sad. I don't know. I don't know if it was meant to be some sort of like strange realism, but then of course it's like fantasy. You kill orcs and you use spells. I don't know that we needed to have this sort of like social realism. Look what happens when heroes don't find treasures. They're eating food out of the trash can. Just weird and depressing. I was talking about the strangeness of the design, the mistakes in the design. The novel, the story opens with you putting together a sandwich with garbage. That's how hungry you are. And then the book tells you that you start the game with 10 provisions, with 10 meals. Maybe you want to save them for the future adventure, which a paragraph 1 you still don't know that you're gonna have. Clearly there is a mistake there between the rules that have been written at some point, and then the initial paragraph was written at a different point, and nobody thought of reconciliating the two things. Also, you know the rules of fighting fantasy. If you lose stamina, then you can recover it by eating food, by resting, by drinking magic potions, but you cannot go past your initial stamina level unless there is a specific rule that says that. So you start the game at your maximum stamina, and paragraph 1 says that after you eat your sandwich made of trash, you recover a point of stamina, which simply makes no sense because you cannot possibly have lost any. And like 2 or 3 paragraphs later, if you take a certain route, you again recover a point of stamina at a point of the book where you cannot possibly have lost any. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I missed something, but no, that's just the way the book is designed. Such a weird, strange mistake, or 2 mistakes in terms of design of the narrative tree that could have been avoided so easily, and that you wouldn't expect by such a seasoned veteran, and by one of the founders of the genre, such as Livingston. But so is life, and and these are the type of mistakes that you find in the book. There are a couple of other small things like that. Sometimes a paragraph would mention something that happens in a narrative tree, but in a branch of the narrative tree, but you could have accessed that paragraph from somewhere else, and then what you're reading there, it makes no sense. Of course, the complexity of a narrative tree is when you have converging points, then the point that is in common needs to make sense no matter where you're coming from. Say there is a passage where a friend of yours gets hurt, she hurts her ankle, and that ankle aches for a long part of the story. You need to help her, she needs to rest. But that doesn't happen in every branch. You may simply avoid that and take another route. And yes, you may access passages where she's complaining about her aching ankle, but you got there, and that's mysterious because you got there from a passage in which she did not hurt her ankle. There is a situation where you may sell your sword, and later the text still mentions that you have a sword. This sort of thing, these mistakes in continuity that they find fairly annoying. And distracting. If you go past those, how is the story? Well, the story starts, with the exception of your unusual level of hunger, starts fairly traditionally. You have heard of a treasure. In this case, you have acquired a map, and you decide to see if the map is reliable. So you leave the city of Chalice, and you travel the land, going to the hills where there is this mysterious place that may contain the treasure, etc., etc. I hope I don't give you too much of a spoiler by telling you that that is not the main quest. As you're traveling the situation and you experience other things, a different quest will emerge, and that will be the main quest that the book will be about, and that you will try to fulfill. It's not about finding a treasure, it's about dealing with a kind of threat that will emerge over the story. And I like that. I like the fact, again, that there's a certain narrative arc. But as I said, the price for that to happen, the price to have a long, complex story with a build-up, with several chapters, with several acts, so to speak, third act, fourth act, etc. The price is linearity. I mean, if you have a certain number, a given number of paragraphs that you're connecting a branching tree, there are only a couple of ways of doing it. If you want to have a long story, then you're using a lot of those paragraphs in that main story with some digressions, limited replay value. Or you can have a net, suppose you have, this is like your central paragraphs, and then you have 5 main storylines that diverge, each then diverging in more situations. Great replay value, but each of these stories will be shorter than, again, the long single one. It's a trade-off that you cannot escape. You have a given number of paragraphs, you put them in a string, and then you have a long story, which can be very fulfilling, epic, but real replay value, or an open world type of text with a lot of replay value in shorter stories. This game book goes in the direction of linearity and complex story with various chapters, various sections, and that is great, but again, the price to pay is once you're done, you're done. Very linear, pretty much you clearly will see even the first time that you read the book what the main path is, and then there will be digressions. So time is literally you're walking by a road and you can choose to keep going or visit a certain house by the side of the road. You walk another little bit and you see a temple, you can choose to keep going or stop, and most likely you will stop at all of these places because there is no reason not to. And because also, probably you need to, in some of those places, there will be items that you need to collect, keywords that you need to find, etc. So even that makes the game more linear because you'll simply try to stop at every single place that you see. And with the exception of a side quest that takes a certain different direction for a while from the main narrative branch, pretty much, again, is like main story and digressions, and probably you'll take all of those small digressions, so you will have seen almost everything that the book has to offer by the first time that you finish the book. Again, it's so linear that pretty much either you are going on the right path or you're dead. If you just don't die, the book pushes you in the right direction towards the final confrontation, where if you don't have the right stuff, if you don't have the right information, you will fail. But again, very linear. Not unusual for Ian Livingstone, but I would say this is more than his average fare. Speaking of things that if you know other books by Livingstone, you may expect that this is not the keyword galore or long laundry list of items to acquire. Yes, you do need to acquire some items, and without those you will not be able to complete the adventure. But in many cases, the items that you can collect are useful but not strictly essential. Maybe you find an antidote, and if later you find a certain monster and the monster poisons you, then having that antidote may save your life. But so in that situation only will be necessary to survive, but it's not like, well, you cannot possibly win unless you get this and this and this and that item, which is what you find in other books by this author. So, in that sense, again, the level of difficulty and the level of frustration is lower than in other books in which, well, here again, you may get to the end and you may have seen almost everything the book has to offer. Other books, you have almost literally have to see everything to be able to do it. So it becomes like a chore to cross off. Okay, I need those 13 magic words, and then I need to decode them and turn the letter A into 1, B into 2, and do a complex mathematical operation to find out the paragraphs, etc. You don't have some of those cerebral things that you had back in the day by Ian Livingstone, and they were the joy of the craziest fighting fantasy readers and a frustration for all us normal mortals. So, gameplay again is interesting. It's challenging, but not too much, but not to the point of being crazy, being frustrating. Yes, you need good stats to start at the beginning, but again, that is typical. Do not believe when fighting fantasy books routinely say, oh, if you find the one true path, you can win it by winning all stats. That is notoriously, I guess, an inside joke, but that is simply not true for most fighting fantasy books, and it's not true here. Something that readers of books such as this one don't like very much is instant death. Because I play for hours and hours, I use strategy, I analyze the situations, I manage my resources well. I'm still alive and in the game, and I get the sense that I quote unquote deserved it. I played well, and there is a reason why I'm there. And then I am traveling a cave and I'm told you want to go right or left. And I go left, the adventure continues, and I go right, I die. I fall in a trap and I die. And that's that. And there was no way at that point of seeing any clue, figuring things out. That is flipping annoying. It feels gratuitous. It almost feels a little bit lazy on the part of the author. If you need to kill me instantly, it should be because a serious mistake that I made, something that I could have seen coming and I didn't. Then it would be like, that's fine. I deserved it. What an interesting book that really is meritocratic and kills me when I deserve to be killed. Well, within the game. But that's not the case. And there is in particular a dungeon here which really is right or left, and not once, but at least 5, 6 times. One way you survive, and the other one you die, and there is no way of avoiding an instant death. Statistically only, it's absolutely impossible. I believe it's almost impossible to go through that dungeon without dying at least once, randomly, undeservedly, and that is not great. So, we talked about the complexity, which is right, which is I like it. I like it. Some of the old fighting fantasy books were challenging. Again, great satisfaction when you complete them. But basically, they were such puzzles, such puzzling, cerebral, abstract, artificial puzzles. That was almost like just a mental duel between you and the author. The story became absolutely immaterial. You didn't care much about the story at all. Here, there's a level of complexity which is challenging, and I like that, but still allows the world of the story to come together. It doesn't push the world of the story, the narrative, the descriptions completely to the background. So the game element, the puzzle element, and the narrative element are well integrated to me, thanks to the fact that the game element is challenging but not excessively so. Again, the length of the story, I really like the fact that when I got at the end of the story, there were so many different chapters. You go to a place, you discover different quests, you travel to another place, and something happens. I was really happy when I got to the end of this epic journey, but I also realized that there was not going to be any reason for me to take the journey again. I simply went back, looking at the map that I was drawing as I continued, to see some locations that I hadn't visited, rather than, wow, I want to take another major path and see what's going to happen there, because there wasn't such a major path that I could explore. So a game book that you can read only once, or 1.5, something like that, is again pluses and minuses. It's not my favorite solution, but it's one that again I didn't throw the book against the wall hating it. I enjoyed the reading. Too bad that there's not going to be much rereading. Production value, like everything else, is not bad, but you can also see that this is aimed at a much younger audience than, production-wise, a much younger audience than before. Do you remember some of the old illustrations of the old fighting fantasy from the 80s, like Russ Nicholson in particular? Some of those, when I was 10, 12, I found terrifying. I shared this memory with you. At the bookstore where I used to pick up my fighting fantasy back in the day in Italy, I would pick up one and I would go through the pages, sort of like this, almost like when you're watching a horror movie, sort of like this, to see if there was something that was too scary. And I look at, oh my gosh, I can't buy this. It's too disturbing. And I would put it back. then the following day I would go there and I would pick it up anyways. But to say those images were so effective, so atmospheric, so powerful, that for at least a day I considered not buying the book because the illustrations were like so, wow, terrifying. I don't know that anyone is gonna have the same reaction in front of this. What? This cute. This guy out of a Disney movie. Oh, and I don't know if it's a spoiler, but see, this is a terrifying super villain. You should be very, very scared by this guy who just looks like he's dressed up for Halloween and ready for trick or treat. They're just not a compelling atmosphere, probably because of the fact that the illustrations, well, there's a certain cartoonish element to them. There isn't much detail. They're just like big blocks, and also all of these nuances, all these different nuances of gray, they're very cute. They really look like a cartoon in black and white as opposed to an illustration that had been designed to start with for black and white. I mean, it looks like a cartoon that was made in color and then they made a mistake and photocopied it in black and white. As opposed to some of those old illustrations you could see that had been designed for black and white because they exploited the contrast, the visual contrast, to create really powerful effects, incredible detail. When you saw a zombie back in the day in the fighting fantasy, you could see every single crack on their face, every little flake of skin falling off, every single, the fibers, the muscles under the skin. The level of detail itself was very powerful, very powerful, very emotional, create a strong impact, and again, it make the world feel very believable and very, very lived in. The people in the old fighting fantasy, you look at those illustrations, they all looked like they were very dirty, had just traveled a long way, their clothes were worn out. There really was a sense of a lived-in fantasy universe, very medieval in that sense, very material, which I absolutely do not find here. And I go on and on about this because it's important, because in the classic fighting fantasy series, the illustrations play such a huge role in, again, creating the atmosphere and enriching the overall experience. And do I have to go to, well, kids this day, they can't take the old illustrations. Maybe, I don't know, try, see what happens. Or maybe, again, they did market studies and they realized, no, they want the sort of like Disney in black and white. And this is not completely ineffective. This is probably the most this quote unquote scariest, the most thrilling image of the whole book. Also, something that I find absolutely annoying. You see here, you probably see this sort of like shadow here and here and here. You know why? Because for some reason somebody thought, wouldn't it be great if we make it look like the book is old and half burned and you're holding an ancient codex. No, I know it's a book published by Scholastic UK. I bought it in a store. I ordered it on Amazon. It wasn't delivered to me by an owl sent by a wizard. It's what? And so, of course, you simply have this motif of stains, and since they're all the same, you can even see, again, when the book is closed. Again, this is supposed somehow to enhance my experience of playing the book. These stains, again, the old scribist that was transcribing this magic code let some ink fall. It's just distracting and annoying, gimmicky and absolutely unimpressive. In sum, although I gave you the sum before, I enjoyed it. I went on and on with things that I don't like, but let us not forget that overall, as I was traveling through the land and seeing various places, I had a good time. And I find this book really tries to strike a balance between, again, the new generations, new readers that know absolutely nothing about fighting fantasy, and so you're trying to appeal to them with this cartoonish art. and with a story that is not too hard, a challenge that is not too hard, but there are also some treats for the old fans. Actually, I would say, in a certain sense, there's a lot of name droppings, a lot of situations and places from previous fighting fantasy books that the old fan will recognize. Yastromo. Several characters, several places. Black Sand is there. Even Fight of Mountain gets a mention, and there is a passage in which you may visit Fight of Mountain. I'm not gonna tell you in what way, which is it's pretty. Oh well, I cannot get there, but you can get there. You can get to Fight of Mountain. So there are a lot of situations that you may encounter that will be reminiscent of other situations in previous books. And again, that is smart, because it gives us something, gives us the sense of like, ooh, we're in the inner circle, we understand that reference to be special, while at the same time, this kind of reference doesn't damage at all the experience of the new readers, because they're not missing anything. Getting who Yastromo is the first time that the character is mentioned, getting why Fight of Mountain is important, is absolutely essential to the adventure. So that is good. So what we have here is a book that is overall good. I think it has something for the new players and something for the older readers, but the overall result is unexceptional. Definitely doesn't rise to the peaks, the heights that the best fighting fantasies of old were able to reach. It's a good, not exceptional story. I would say, if you never read a fighting fantasy story, this is not like, oh, you had to start from this one. The old classic ones remain, the old classic ones, House of Danger. No, sorry, House of Hell. House of Danger is a choose your own adventure book. House of Hell, Creature of Havoc, Fight Up Mountain, those good old ones remain the ones that you should go for. If you're a completist, well, you're gonna read this book anyways, no matter what I say in this review, and good for you. But try not to be too disappointed, because it's an okay book, and I hope it serves the purpose of rekindling a general interest in the book, bringing new readers, reminding old readers that the series is still alive. But I believe this book demonstrates that you won't be able to do this forever. Again, maybe you're gonna have 4 or 5 more books, sort of like solid, average, predictable, just to lay the foundation. But then I hope that we're gonna have new authors. We need new authors to start getting involved in this, and we need the series to get more ambitious and start taking risks, like it did towards the end of the first run. And it wasn't that ambition that caused the demise of the series. It wasn't, again, ambitious books such as Isle of the Undead that caused the death of the series that had already been scheduled. If anything, I believe if we have a group of books that are gonna bring the brand and the formula to the attention of the public, and then we start moving past the classic. Again, the classic, such Citadels of Chaos that I saw has been released. We move past the classic and we start taking risks and adding more complexity, more experiments. I think then the series can really become something special again. As is something that kids, I hope, will enjoy. And nostalgic people like me, well, we'll keep reading everything that comes out that is a new fighting fantasy book. But I wish that I was doing it because I am super mega excited, I'm shivering with expectation, rather than just because, well, I read them all so far, I'm gonna read this one too. It's a sufficient motivation for me to purchase the book, but not the best motivation that there is. I hope fighting fantasy will come back with a vengeance, will be great, will be strong, will be amazing. So far, this new fighting fantasy book is good. It's okay, nothing exceptional. I've seen worse, I've seen better. Give it a try, see for yourself.